Wanted to welcome you to today's stakeholder forum, and we are talking about the Land Access Code of Practice and a draft decision that we've put out recently. And I'll talk you through what this all means. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm hosting this on. For me, that is the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands that you're all on today, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating today. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So, next slide, thanks. So, introductions. I think most of you hopefully know me. My day job is the executive director of the energy division here at the ESC, but I'm actually acting as the CEO at the moment while we're between CEOs. And there are some of my team who have been involved in this review are also on the line, although Aaron, who many of you know, is not with us because he just had a baby, so he's off on paternity leave. But I'll just introduce you to the rest of my team. So there's Nathan Zhivov, if you want to wave. So Nathan's acting as the Executive Director of the Energy Division while Aaron's off, and I'm not there either. Anna, do you want to wave, Anna? Many of you will know Anna. She's Acting Director of Analysis and Reform. And John Paul, Manager of Reform, and Gareth Scott, who's an advisor in Reform and Energy. So I'd also like to obviously thank everyone who's come along today. We appreciate that you're giving up your valuable time to attend this forum. We appreciate it. This housekeeping slide won't be news to any of you, so if we can just use these kind of protocols, that would be great. So with no further ado, might follow on to why we're here. So perhaps next slide. Thank you. Okay, so I think many of you would have been involved in this process for a couple of years now. So, but I will just go through some of it because there'll be some of you that are new to this process. So today we're here to talk about this Land Access Code of Practice, and this is about regulating how transmission companies can use statutory powers under one of our state acts, the Electricity Industry Act, to access private land in Victoria. So really, we see this code of practice as an opportunity to balance the statutory right for electricity transmission companies to access private land with the rights of those people who own or are interested in that land. So obligations in this code of practice are about facilitating consultation, engagement, ensuring early engagement with landowners and affected parties, with the view that it will increase the likelihood of agreement about access to land. So what we've done is we've released a draft version of the Code of Practice, and we're keen to hear everyone's views about it. So next slide, thanks. For those of you who haven't been on this journey for the last couple of years, I'll just do a bit of a recap. So in December, I guess it was the end of 2021, there've been concerns for a while, but that was when the Commission, the Essential Services Commission, got involved in this space because we were very aware of the concerns around how AusNet in particular was accessing private land pursuant to Section 93 of the Electricity Industry Act in relation to the Western Renewables project. And as many of you know, there were some pretty heartbreaking stories around that time, and it was very clear that there would be benefit to the Commission coming into this space and putting more rigour around the use of those powers. So we've held a number of these forums. You've seen me do this a couple of times before. We've also been going out to the regions, holding roundtables, meeting one-on-one with parties, and really trying to listen and get an understanding of the pressure points between transmission companies and parties interested in land. So because we wanted to do something quickly when the issues were pretty acute towards the end of 2021, we did what we called a statement of expectations, and effectively it's not regulation. It was something that was just our expectations around it. It wasn't something that was enforceable by law. And that was really only ever designed to be an interim measure as we developed this code of practice, which will be enforceable with quite significant penalties for breaching it. So you can just see the various stages there. I think I'll just flick through the rest of that actually. We put out a consultation paper in February this year. We've just been continuing to consult. And now we're really at the stage where we've published a draft decision and we've published a draft code so that people can see exactly what it looks like. And now we're at the point where we're wanting to seek feedback on this draft code. So might go to the next slide if that's okay. So this slide's really just setting out what we've heard so far, and we have heard loud and clear that there's now need for an enforceable code of practice, as I said, with pretty significant penalties for non-compliance. And the importance of safe and respectful behaviour between transmission companies and affected land access parties. So, and then, of course, the biosecurity issues, potential damage to land, livestock and property has been a key concern that we've heard. Also, the need for training for transmission staff and their contractors, and in particular in relation to key aspects of land management such as correct access points, weeds and pest control. And then another key issue that's been raised is around providing sufficient information to landowners about external dispute resolution processes that are available to them. So I'll just mention what our role is, because I know this can be very confusing, and we've heard from a lot of people that they're just not clear on the different roles of government, of different government agencies in relation to transmission projects, and that is fair because it is a very confusing space. So what we do, so we are an independent regulator. We are here, we act in accordance with statute. So our statutory objective is to promote the long-term interests of Victorian consumers. We regulate a whole bunch of essential services. And one of the things that we do is that we license electricity transmission companies. And so, really, an electricity transmission company that holds a license must comply with all of their legal obligations in order to be allowed to operate in the state. And it is by getting that license that then a transmission company can use Section 93 of the Electricity Industry Act, which is obviously why we're all here. So next slide, thanks. Okay, so I'll just give a little overview of the proposed code of practice, and it is fairly similar to those of you who were involved in our development of the statement of expectations. It's really just changing what the principles were in that statement of expectations into an enforceable code, and that means that the language is a bit it's probably a bit more prescriptive than what was in the statement of expectations, because we want it to be clear and enforceable. So, but there are a few differences, and I just wanted to make sure I'm clear about what the differences are. So in the statement of expectations, we said that would only apply to new major transmission projects. So now in the code of practice, what we are proposing is that it will apply to all new electricity transmission projects. So not just major ones, all new electricity transmission projects. and I think, although now I've just lost it. Oh, yes, and also to significant upgrades of existing transmission lines. So those are the two key aspects of the scope, and that is different to what we had in the draft. So what we are not doing is proposing to extend it beyond that. So I guess we're very keen to hear about any views about the scope. So do we want to talk about scope now while we've got a question from Lisa. Do you want to talk, Lisa? Hi, Lisa.
Hi. You could probably predict I was going to ask this one.
Good. Go for it.
I suppose the issue is at the start of one of the early slides, it was about actually making sure that companies acted lawfully and within their responsibility. But really, a lot of how Section 93 has been looked at is really just focused on that construction stage and isn't dealing with anything that we've been hearing about. The last time a lot of people heard anything from a transmission company was SECV's letter on compensation that said they couldn't plant trees and they couldn't build a structure. And there's been a lot of change. There isn't a formal access agreement. There is probably a whole set of behaviours that have morphed into time, especially since we have no SEC. And I suppose that's the problem about this is a long-term relationship, but we seem to be focusing on the first few dates.
So thanks, Lisa. So I've heard. So are you suggesting that there are issues? Sorry, I'm not aware of this. So are there issues with people who have got who are getting access under the old SECV arrangements? Is that?
Yes.
That's not something I've heard of. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Well,
can you talk a bit more about that?
We've reported it. We've put it in our previous submissions. We've had discussions with ESC on it. So it is an issue, and it's been an issue with this process.
Okay. Do you want to talk a bit more about like what sort of issues are happening? Like if there's been long-standing arrangements. It just wasn't something I heard during the statement of expectations. I know my team have been talking about it, so I'm really keen to understand.
Yeah. So we did also raise it in that process as well, and we're quite disappointed with the line that was in there, saying basically a lot of the companies were saying, "Oh no, there's no issues." People have constantly reported issues, but it's quite often to the person who is on their land. This quite often hasn't accessed it via the easement. If they're asked what they're doing, what they're spraying, why they're doing something, they're told, you can't speak to us. We've got the right to be there. Literally bugger off. And that is a problem because the world's changed a lot since 1980. And this is some of the tensions with the new projects as well. But one of the most recent changes was, federal changes to biosecurity, where if you're a livestock farmer, for example, and someone sprayed a chemical and you're about to sell your stock, you've got to sign a vendor declaration. You've got to sign what's been used on your land. Otherwise, you're not allowed to sign your stock. These companies are refusing to even provide basic information when asked. So that's the tension, and that's not great behaviours. And maybe it's because they don't actually understand that it's an issue, but it is a serious issue for people. So there's not a lot of confidence in these companies actually understanding the impacts. Again, that the last time anyone's ever heard from that generally was that letter. We're now on the new lines, you're told you're not allowed to drive your tractor if it's more than 5 metres high. There would be tractors going under those transmission lines currently that are over 5 metres high. If they haven't been told the rules have changed, if they haven't had contact from Energy Safe or the transmission company, or even if they don't even have a name or a contact, about if someone's done the wrong thing, or you're worried about, I've seen some big structural looking cracks in some of them. Who do you report that to? So there isn't that relationship. So it's.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yep. So it's just.
No, that's. I think I've got a bit of a delay, Lisa. Yeah. So is that so I'm assuming you're talking about AusNet. That's fine. You can tell. Like, is that and I'm just wondering whether they have different processes within their organisation to deal with new transmission lines as opposed to greenfields. As opposed to the old ones.
But even that, I'm guessing it is AusNet too. But how do people find out who the transmission company is? If you do need to, if there is a fire in the area or something, sometimes before people are allowed in, you've got to work out who to contact to turn the transmission line off. So if no one's quite sure.
There are farmers that have a transmission line on their property and they don't know who owns it?
Because the last bit of correspondence they got was from the SECV.
Right.
So I know the big issue now is new, but it's just because no one's been looking for this and no one's, half of these people haven't known who they can go to. Don't assume it isn't an issue. And if this is about making sure that the people that have this power are actually using it well, it's not just about going on and doing some studies and maybe a little bit at the construction stage. It's an issue for the life of the asset. And if you come in and if you do something the wrong way, you haven't, kept to the easement. You've come in with, a truck and a few things, and you've trampled a crop just before harvest. That's actually quite an impact on someone. But at the moment, we'd read Section 93 as applying to that, but the way it's being interpreted in the code probably isn't.
Okay, so we've asked the transmission companies whether they're using Section 93 with regard to existing transmission lines, and they've said no. So you think that's wrong, or?
Well, I think it's wrong that there seems to be no oversight of any existing transmission line. That we're going to create a two-tiered system where we'll maybe worry about the new ones in certain circumstances, but we won't actually make sure that companies have a fair, transparent process and are engaging with people whose land their assets are on when they're changing rules, when they're needing to do something. I've heard from quite a few people, and before new transmission became a lot of an issue, you would get calls out of the blue just saying, I've had someone, they were spraying something near my stock, they refused to tell me what it was.
Really? Gosh.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful, Lisa. Can we my team follow up with you to get all those people that have told you those stories? Like we want to hear them. And we can drive out. Nathan and the team are going out into the regions. They're happy to go and meet with whoever. So yeah, please let us know. We're very keen to talk to you.
Yeah, we also did suggest that it would have actually been quite simple. And probably should have happened for to get this involvement was to go to councils and ask councils to give notice to the people along those lines of this review.
Well, we have gone to councils.
Have they given contact to?
No, we've had lots of discussion with councils. There are some
issues.
Yes,
but that's not what I said. To go to council for them to send a notice of this review to people that have transmission assets.
Look, there's a lot of issues, Lisa. I reckon I've given you a good time, so let's move on. Thanks. All right, next slide. Thanks. All right, so I'm just going to talk about what's in and what's out of scope. So there's a few things that legally will be out of scope of this review. So the first one is compensation. The code will not cover compensation. These issues are covered by the LACA. Most of you will know what that is. It's the Land Acquisition and Compensation Act. So that's out. Lisa?
It's maybe a Ticky Touchwood. I don't think you can say you can't. You're not dealing with compensation for the creation of the easement, but there is a provision in one of the aspects of 93 where if a company has done harm in using their easement, then you're able to seek compensation.
All right, thanks. So I'm not going to give legal advice on the interpretation of the code, but yeah, you're right. There is an obligation in the Electricity Industry Act to do as little damage as possible when accessing land. So, yep, take your point. All right. Secondly, Code of Practice does not cover acquisitions of easement over land. We're not going to put obligations on landowners, but I do want to be very clear that I have absolutely no tolerance for violence or threats against employees of transmission companies. They are just doing their job. So that's unacceptable. Now, one thing that we do want to consult on is whether or not the code should regulate the content of voluntary access agreements. So to date, my position has really been, well, if people want to enter into a voluntary contract, then we're all adults, they can do that. That should be outside of the code. But I am keen to hear views if anyone would like to put any views forward about whether or not it should cover voluntary agreements. You can do it now, if you raise your hand, or do it later, that's fine. Lisa?
Again, renewables generation have commercial consent, which is voluntary, but I think there does need to be some level of base standard because people aren't always brilliantly informed when they sign a voluntary agreement, and I think that there should be some, general rules applying in both cases.
Okay. Well, is there anyone else who wanted to make a comment? Hi, Alan.
Hi there. Just a quick one on the expanding the question I'm looking at the moment. Expanding the scope of the statement of expectations to regulate significant upgrades on existing lines that's almost an essential situation going forward. I guess my situation is that new lines are fine. There's a fairly reasonable statement of expectations and also clear guidance. However, I do believe that upgrades of existing lines to carry the extra loads of the new lines, etc., is certainly required. Certainly where it's going to, as you indicated earlier, crossover on easements. Or where easements need to be extended, widened, lengthened, or whatever to accommodate those upgrades. I guess in the longer term, that needs to be built in as part of the total that you're doing now, the Land Access Code. And I believe, or my view is that both the new and the existing should be melded together in a better framework than what you're doing at the moment, or what I can see so far. It should apply to all transmission lines in due course so that everybody is on the same page. That's my view.
Yeah. So can you tell me more about your situation, Alan? So have you got a spur line? Like what's on your property? Or
I don't have a direct contact of any of the lines at this particular point in time. But there's a clear indication that, I don't know what level down of power you're going down to. You're going down to 22 kV or you're going up past the 500 kV. My role in life at the moment is to be on the community consultative group for the Western Link. So that's where I am at the moment, and I'm on that on a regular basis. Haven't missed too many meetings, but land access has been a major issue for the Western Link coming in through from Bulgana, and that is not going to disappear. I believe that I noticed that Barb Ford is already on the site as well tonight, and I'm sure she'll have something to say a bit later when it's relevant to what she is going to look at.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think that's really, it's really interesting. Would you sort of grandfather everything over, because I guess what you're saying is everything's going to be upgraded over time to deal with the new demand on the system.
Well, exactly. You've got power. You've got a single spine running right down the east coast of Australia at the moment, which EMO is now in a state of panic over, and that's something that needs to be addressed. But that's not in the scope of what you're doing. You're dealing mainly with, I guess, the Western Link at the moment and upgrades of or changes of power distribution along the 500 kV line that currently exists between La Trobe Valley and the state border in South Australia.
Yeah.
I've been told that the existing 500 kV line is near capacity, and that was a response from AusNet at one particular point in time. But with the decommissioning of the power down in La Trobe Valley, then the flow of power along the line will eventually be going the other way. So at this point, I'm not quite sure where you're heading with the land access code, because you're going to have to widen quite a number of easements and that to accommodate any new upgrades. So whether it's an existing one or a new easement or a new line being put in, it needs to be considered as a template, if you like, rather than have two separate ones, one continuous going forward.
Yeah. Did you freeze or did you stop speaking, Alan?
Yeah, sorry, no, that's it. Yep.
That was it. Yeah, and it sort of relates to what Ian was saying in the chat. Did you want to talk, Ian?
Yeah.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
That's okay. Did you want to just talk? You've just made a couple of comments in the chat, wondering if you wanted to talk.
Well, I just noticed I'm in the GRES, which is the Gippsland Lines Advisory Group, and I've been talking to farmers about some of the issues. They're pretty hot on a couple of issues, and compensation and revenue sharing. Compensation in the context of a new line is starts when people come on with surveyors and finish when the line's commissioned. So there's quite a lot of stages in that. I've brought in the issue of revenue sharing because I've done a bit of research and noticed that those people who are lucky enough to be farmers hosting wind farms are getting up to $20,000 per year per wind tower. And so there is revenue sharing over in the Western District, and we're just curious to see whether revenue sharing could be part of the compensation for people in Gippsland.
Yeah, it's a good question, and Ian, and I understand it's certainly something on people's minds. It is as, and I know this is a really annoying answer, and you're probably getting it from lots of parts of government, but that is out of scope of what we're dealing with. Compensation, it's not something that as a regulator we have any say over, but I do think there might be, I'm not sure if there's any policy people here on the line from DECA, but I just encourage you to engage with government over that issue rather than ourselves, and certainly we'll pass on all these comments as well.
Yeah, it's very live issues, and while I understand the code's not to cover that, it's something that farmers I know certainly want addressed.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right. Well, thanks, Ian, and thanks, Alan, and thanks, Lisa. That was a good discussion. So we might move on to slide 11. Okay, so some of you will have read the code, but I can understand if you haven't. It's quite a detailed document. So we just wanted to take you through what it looks like and get your views on some parts of it. So the first bit, we're calling it part 1. This is all the preliminary information about the code, and then it's really the bulk of the code is split into 3 areas. So Part 2 is about the obligations on a transmission company prior to accessing land. And then part 3 is obligations during that visit. And as Lisa said earlier, this is about minimising the impact or damage to the land and dealing with biosecurity and all the risks. And then part 4 is about what we expect from the transmission companies after access, so their internal complaints handling process, how they deal with a complaint within their own organisation, and then the third-party dispute resolution scheme, and also how they report on how their use of these powers, and also report back to the landowner as well. Lisa.
Maybe this is a language thing, but I think post-access is confusing because I think you're meaning kind of post easement acquisition and construction, but the actual physical access is ongoing. But a lot of the processes aren't. So most farmers would see access as being a life of.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Lisa. Thank you, because you're right. It's very unusual that it's just going to be come on for one survey and we're gone. This is about forming a partnership over a longer time. So yeah, I think we'll have a look at that language. I agree with you. So I might go to the next slide and we can get into a bit more detail then. So, right. So the before access, all right, so there's several actions that need to take place. There's certain obligations a transmission company must follow prior to accessing land. So really this is about ensuring landowners are consulted and they receive detailed information about the transmission project, the purpose of access. And really this is important so that we think the landowner can use that information to make an informed decision about whether to enter into a voluntary access agreement. We talked about that before. So if that's not reached, that's fine. So under our code, the transmission company would have to provide a formal thing, what we're calling a notice of access. And you've got to leave a period of time. So the transmission company needs to provide all this information and then wait at least 20 business days. And in the usual course of events, it will be probably longer than that, but that is the minimum period to provide this notice of access. And then at least 10 days before the land is accessed, they've got to inform landowners about the purpose, duration, and specific details of the access. And what we're really trying, we would really like some feedback on these time periods here, the 20 days, the 10 days, and also we've said that the maximum time that this arrangement can be in place is 6 months. So one of these notice of accesses will only be valid for the access period set out in the notice of 6 months. So these are the kind of things that we're keen to seek your views on. So if anyone's got any thoughts, again, don't have to give them now, but on these timeframes, it's one we're particularly interested in is the timing of 10 business days. Is that we want to understand, it's got to be, it can't be an excessive period of time. The transmission companies need to be able to do access land in an appropriate manner, but is 10 business days enough? Lisa?
I think generally it is, but the aim is probably going to be making sure you've got a proper agreement between, different types of landholders, because there will be critical times where maybe in that window it's not going to be appropriate for a range of reasons, sometimes safety, sometimes business impact, for there to be access. So maybe that's a little bit nuanced, but I think the aim is actually trying to make sure that where you can, you're timing that access in a way that doesn't cause harm.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, if you're doing, if it's sort of harvest or a particular sensitive time on the farm, I think that's really important. Alan?
I think you just covered it, because there's no known way that the farmer's going to let you on the property when he's got a wheat harvest, say, and he's trying to beat the weather that's coming in over the mountains and things like that. So it would need to be a proposed time of 10 business days, subject to agreement with the person that that you want the access for. If it needs to be postponed, then obviously is 48 hours sufficient for a change?
Mm.
But certainly your farmers in harvest time are not going to be impressed if all of a sudden you need access to do your measurements and things like that.
Yep. No, I think that's a really important point, Alan. And the consultation is really critical, that the transmission company takes into account the circumstances of the landowner. Ian, did you want to talk to your comment, or I can read it out?
No, sorry. I'm just not sure whether this little part of the code was referring to just the process of working out where the line's going to go, or is it for the whole process of survey right through to construction and commissioning?
So this is for the whole process, but it's just about when the transmission company is entering onto land.
But
so
they enter onto land in every stage right through to commissioning, don't they? Yeah.
And after commissioning.
Yeah. So the 6 months, in my opinion, is completely inadequate if that's what you want to cover.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it could be longer, I guess. The question is whether, if you're a landowner and you haven't signed a voluntary agreement, we're trying to balance those rights again, of the right of the transmission company to enter into land with the right of the landowner to exercise rights over their property. So, in a way, a shorter period, I think, is more advantageous for the landowner in a way. But, I'm keen for thoughts.
One of the last 500 lines that I was involved in as a supervising engineer took quite a few months from planning it right through until we'd finished rebuilding that line, and that was the line from Moorabool down to Portland.
Yep.
And just the 7 that blew over took 18 months to deal with.
So I guess the question to you people is this to cover the construction and the maintenance and repairs, or is it just to do the survey and assessment of the line's route?
So it's all that's happening here. Sorry, I think I might have confused you. So all that is happening here is we're just saying the notice about access can only last for 6 months. So they need to issue you another notice after the 6 months. That's all that this is saying. I might get Nathan actually to explain this, if that's okay, or someone from my team.
Thanks very much, Sarah. For those who haven't met me, this is my first chance. So I'm Nathan Zhivov. I'm acting in the Executive Director role here in the Energy Division. I think that the point we're trying to make is that the code of practice will apply to a transmission company that is accessing land. Whether they are accessing land during the early works period, during the construction period, during the commissioning period, or during the operating period of the transmission line, they are still going to be, unless they reach a voluntary agreement, accessing land under those powers under Section 93. And this code of practice will apply to them whenever they access land in that way. So a lot of you have talked about this being an ongoing relationship, and we agree. And the code of practice we're trying to put in place would aim to strike a fair balance amongst everybody's rights for the entirety of that period, from the early works all the way through to the operation. To kind of emphasise what Sarah was saying about the 6 months notice, the notices lasting 6 months, the aim of that is to give a higher level of protection to landowners so that someone can't issue you with a notice and turn up in 5 years' time and say, oh, but I issued you a notice 5 years ago, so I'm covered. We want to make sure that they've given you notice, and they might need to access your land for 1 day, or they might be accessing your land for a lengthier period of time. But the maximum period of time before they have to issue you another notice is 6 months. I hope that clarifies things.
That was much clearer. That was what I was trying to say, but I didn't say it very well. What about the burden? I think so. I feel like, Lisa, I think, I mean, it could be longer than that, and maybe that's the feedback we're getting, is that even landowners are saying, no, actually, we would just prefer to have a longer period of time under a single notice. Yeah, okay, and no, that's a good. I think that's good feedback. Maybe there's benefits to landowners as well as transmission companies for the notice to be of a longer period. That wasn't what we thought people would think, but that's. I think that's something we need. And it might be
how it operates. Like, I didn't hate that explanation, but I think I've had experience with people that are, constantly getting exploration licenses for mining. And they always feel that the one time they don't spend $5,000 of, advice and whatever to respond to something is the time something will happen. So it'll be that risk reward between, should it be purely 6 months, or should there actually be a process about, this is how we see this working. We'll check in and review every now and then in case there's been, something new, like the new biosecurity change or whatever. So that, I suppose, the key behind everything is we really need these agreements or codes or things that haven't been in place for 23 years to actually be working for the life of the asset. And I think if you've got something in place that everyone knows where they stand, then you can be having those conversations. So I don't want it to be a set and forget, but it's also when's too often.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Hi, Nathan. Legit, did you want to talk, or if we can just take your comment in the chat that not longer?
And maybe that's something for discussion in the individual agreements, because it'll work for some people and it mightn't work for others.
Although I guess this would be, this would be the Section 93 standard in the code, the no more than 6 months. But anyway, look, I'm definitely hearing there's a range of views, and I think that's been helpful, and we'll get everyone's views before we go to the final decision on this one. Okay, so we might move on to the next slide, team. All right, so this is a very critical one. So this is where we're talking about risk minimisation. This is what Lisa was talking about earlier, the requirement to do as little damage as possible. And we've got specific requirements related to biosecurity. So there will be requirements that access must be undertaken safely, including having in place fire and health risk management measures, and staff and contractors who access land must have relevant training and skills and respect the privacy and private assets of affected parties. So in relation to biosecurity, and we've obviously, this is a really, really critical issue. What we're proposing is that the transmission company will have to firstly consult with the landowner on their biosecurity needs, and they must do that, genuinely consult before they issue this notice of access that we talked about before. Then they must develop, implement and provide good information to landowners about their biosecurity policies and procedures, and those policies and procedures must be in accordance with good industry practice to minimise the spread of weeds, pests or pathogens. And they've got to provide the details of these policies and procedures on request before they access your land. And then afterwards, they must provide a report to the landowner within 15 days after the land has been accessed, which includes details around the personnel from the transmission company who attended, the locations accessed, the materials or chemicals utilised, and a description of the activities undertaken on the land. Lisa?
I think you dealt with it in the second bit, but
yeah,
it's important to sort of notice the distinction between, I suppose, the weeds, pests, pathogens, which is more a CalPACT, and then the broader sort of disease, animal welfare issues, or even chemicals used, withholding periods, vendor declaration types of things, because there's sometimes confusion. And I know the statement of expectation, because it was really about consultants, was focused more at that weeds level. But I think it's important, and I notice it's industry standards. I'm guessing you're meaning commodity sort of RDC, agriculture industry standards, rather than electricity industry standards. But again, just being really clear on that, because it's a very complex. There's about 7 different pieces of legislation that deal with biosecurity between state and federal government, so it's a really complex area.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I'm just going to get my team to actually put in the chat the drafting of that provision of the code, because it does refer to a particular standard. In my brain, it's Agriculture Victoria, but that could be wrong. So anyway, Jean-Paul's typing. He's going to tell me what it is.
Yeah, which is a narrow window. So there's...
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So, as you know, there's 4 pieces of biosecurity legislation that AgVic looks at, but there's also a couple of federal bits, plus there's the CalPACT and DECA.
Okay, so Jean-Paul, can you just put what you just put into the main chat? So it is develop and implement biosecurity policies and procedures in accordance with good industry practice to minimise the spread of weeds, pests or pathogens, including come clean, stay clean, go clean practices consistent with recommendations by Agriculture Victoria. And so, Lisa, your view is that those come clean, stay clean, go clean practices are not sufficient? Is that...
Well, that's one aspect of biosecurity, but the things that you've listed are actually AgVic might be giving guidance on it, but the actual legislative basis, a lot of that is in the Catchment and Land Protection Act, which is in the environment bit of DECA. And there is a bit of a review at the moment, so who knows what's going on. But there's also the federal biosecurity, which is where, you know, the vendor declarations, sales, cross-border issues as well. It's a confusing space.
Yeah. My team is saying it's currently being reviewed. Okay, no, that's excellent. Well, this is why we're consulting. We want to get this right. Does anyone else, team? Can you just go to the next slide with the questions on it, please? And then, hi Nathan, have you able to speak?
Look, I question the 15 days. Knowing the personnel coming onto your place, you should have that within 24 hours or 48 hours. So you have an outbreak of foot and mouth or whatever else, and it's 15 days until you've got traceability of all the people and vehicles that have been on your property. So, and the whole industry will have been shut by that stage. So 15 days for me is way too long on a biosecurity measure in this sense.
I'd agree too. For animal welfare and things like that, there's withholding periods on different chemicals. You need to know that sooner rather than later.
You've got to know that, and you've got to be able to lock a place up, knowing exactly who's been on your place within a 48-hour period. So not 15 days later, and you're scrambling around chasing people through whatever medium to try and find out who's been on your place.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So my team's telling me, and Jean-Paul, if you can find the relevant part in the, oh yeah, you've said to me. All right, so any incidents in relation to the land. So Nathan L, sorry, just to distinguish you from Nathan Z. If there was an outbreak of foot and mouth, that must be, any incidents must be reported immediately. So
but you don't have the.
But you
the
don't
relevant,
know, is that what you're
you
saying?
don't have the
You wouldn't
relevant
know.
information. You're 15 days
Okay.
later getting your response of who's actually been on your place.
Or you're signing off a vendor declaration.
Yes.
3 days later, and you don't know. So you're either perjuring yourself or you're. And if there's any testing done, you're in trouble.
So chemicals, one thing. It's movement of vehicles is another thing. Now you don't need to know the full report for 15 days. I can understand that if they're doing surveys or whatever else. But the knowing who's been on your place should be there basically on the day of them entering your property.
Okay, so we've got a requirement that says document any environmental or biosecurity incidents that may occur when accessing land immediately. Should that also include?
Well, the incident may be already on the property, and then they're taking it elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's I think that's a really important point, Nathan L. Is anyone else want to contribute to that discussion about the time frame that you will get a report about the access on your land? Or does anyone want to comment? I mean, this is a big issue. So the biosecurity requirements, and if anyone just wants to talk about how it's going at the moment in discussions with transmission companies, do you feel as though the companies are listening and implementing the protocols that you need for your particular crops and properties?
I'm thinking out loud, literally. Yeah. But it might also be it's going to be hard for some of these people to actually know if it's a biosecurity incident or environmental risk. So there maybe part of the discussion is actually working out, which chemicals, for example, might be safe to use, as well as making sure you do have, the good hygiene processes. And for certain industries, the intensives, there's going to be even, chemical baths potentially or whatever else because of that disease risk. But actually making sure that everyone kind of knows why certain, if you've used chemical X, which then has a withholding period, or, chemical Y that might have an impact in certain circumstances on the waterway, that those things are sort of included in the discussion. So if they've used any of these things, it's either been discussed with before or it's immediately reported, because that will have actions stemming from it that need to be done in a timely manner.
Absolutely. No, look, that's we are in a different part of the code. I don't know if we've talked about this tonight, but the requirement for training on the transmission company staff who come out to land, that's something really important. We're hoping will mitigate some of those issues. And Ian's talking about subcontractors. And I take your point. It's absolutely critical that subcontractors comply with these arrangements, and that will be required by the code. That's clear. Is anyone else's hand up, or is that an old hand? Nathan, did you want to talk again? Nathan L?
No, that was an old hand, but
that was an old hand. All right.
Yeah, but I have a question on induction into workplace. So the proponent or whoever else is accessing your land, coming onto a business practice, in normal business practice, that person needs to be inducted by the business, not by the company accessing your land. Otherwise, you're in breach of your occupational health and safety regulations. So where does that fall on an insurance side of things? If you haven't inducted the people that are actually coming onto your property, like as a business, inducting those into workplace practices and issues that may arise, and risks and hazards that are there on a given property.
Yeah, I've heard this. I know, Nathan, you and other.
I've been in a situation where that.
Yeah,
that
I
has
know,
been the
I know.
case. So I
know we've had this discussion.
Yep. So there's a legislative requirement to induct the people that are coming onto your place, but in what you're telling us, as long as they're inducted by the proponent, well, everything's fine. Well, hang on, workplaces are different. So how does that stand up for me legally, or for a business legally under the occupational health and safety laws?
So I think what we need to do, look, I'm hearing you, and that sounds that sounds very complicated and like it's going to put you in a difficult position. I do remember we talked about this at the statement of expectation stage, and I know that WorkSafe is the relevant regulator. It's not helpful for me to say that because it's not helpful for me to say there's another regulator that deals with that. So what I will do is I'm going to undertake to speak to WorkSafe about that and understand how landowners are expected to deal with that, because that's completely unacceptable that you'd be put in a position where you're worried about breaching some other law because someone's using a statutory power to enter your land. So I'll do that, Nathan L, and I will come back to you on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just to back Nathan up on that as well, I think it's also a safety issue, because there will be on farms, there are times and actions that can actually be quite risky. You don't get between a cow and her calf at a certain time of the year, or you'll come off second best. So it's Absolutely. Those kind of things that, maybe it's done in training. You do have a certain level of responsibility to actually make sure people are aware of what the risks at that time are, and they will change.
Yeah. Yep. No, I hear you. I think that's important. All right. We might move on then to, and I'm good. Oh, Alan, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, there needs to be a requirement, if you like, for the people coming onto the land of the farmers and anybody else affected by the line, that they're not held liable for any accident that occur as a result of those people coming onto the land. I'm not quite sure how you're going to address that, but insurance is going to be a major issue from a public liability aspect, unless that's well and truly addressed by the people coming, AusNet or whoever's wanting to access the land. They need to indemnify the landholders about any accidents.
I hear you, Alan, and I think like with Nathan, that's just another cause of stress that landowners certainly don't need to be worried about that. So I've already understood. Yes, I understand. I'll extend my. I'm going to regret this. Yes, I'm going to speak to WorkSafe about the OHS issue and come back to both of you on that.
Thank you.
All right. So the next one, and I take Lisa's point. I think that was a good point about the language after access, because it's not after access. You're right. This is an ongoing relationship between landowners and transmission companies, a partnership. But in any event, with this language, and we may change it based on that feedback, this is about the requirements in the code that an electricity transmission company has got to implement complaints handling and dispute resolution processes So they've also got to maintain records of all land access information, and we're proposing that those records be kept for a period of 7 years. And similarly to what they do now after the Statement of Expectations, we're proposing that the transmission companies provide monthly reports to us, the ESC, about the use of Section 93, so each of the instances of the use, and in every case, how they complied with the code, and that's at the moment they do every incident and every access visit, and how they complied with the Statement of Expectations, and those are available on our website, although they are redacted because we don't want to publish people's personal information about their properties. So perhaps go to the next slide. We'll just have the questions, and then I saw Lisa's hand up. She can start. So these are the questions. We've had a talk over the years about EWOV, which is the Energy Water Ombudsman of Victoria, and whether or not they are the appropriate ombudsman, the external dispute resolution body for this. And there's some other questions there, but I'll go to Lisa.
And I think that the code is, a good step in the right direction, but it's again just being really clear about what is meant by access when it starts, finishes, whatever else. So I know on one of the existing transmission lines, I know the companies quite often will use a helicopter at quite low level, or a plane, to actually avoid doing an inspection, physically accessing it. But the noise from that or the wind from that can actually have some impacts on occasion. So it's just about trying to work out, is that something that will be reported on, or is it purely just the new easements kind of issues? Because a lot of the access issues tend to be the regular maintenance or going in and checking, rather than the more. There's a lot of issues with the new transmission as well, but there's ongoing issues that a lot of the companies do not see as being land access, because they see that as being acquiring an easement rather than actually what they do on that easement.
I do remember this helicopter issue because it was raised during the Statement of Expectations. I think the answer is no, under the proposed code of practice, I think it's not proposed to be covered because, well, I don't know why. I mean, it's a good question. Do we, and let's talk about it. Do people
Technically, it's 15 metres, so they're probably above what you own, but it's the broader question as well. A lot of the companies will say they're complying because we haven't done anything what they will call under the code, because they haven't acquired a new easement, or they haven't done major new works, but they have access land.
So you're saying that the damage, so I'm just trying to figure out what the impact on the landowner would be. So I mean, obviously the requirement under Section 93 is to do as little damage as possible. So what's the damage, we think? Is it like the noise? Is that what you're kind of...
No. So that's given a real live example where, rather than accessing on the easement where they have a gate, they actually went through the guts of the farm, drove over things they probably shouldn't have driven over, kept gates open so livestock moved everywhere where they shouldn't be, and then did some damage even outside the easements. They will say, oh no, but we can just do whatever we want, we can access. That's not doing, trying to do harm, but they will see that that's outside this code, where I don't think that's what was meant to be outside the code. It is meant to be their behaviours when they're accessing land. And most of the risk, most of the damage happens during operation, not, well, post-construction. There's a lot of construction, but the operations can have a lot of impact as well. it's not just, oh, there's noise or there's dust. And I think that's where the difficulty is that if a landholder raises this issue with someone on their land or brings up company or EWOV, they're basically treated like, why are you even bothering? There's no issue, where it really is, you know, a serious issue for them.
Okay. No, that's so there's a couple of different issues there, I think. And the helicopter one, I'm still trying to think about that. I think the answer is that I don't think you need Section 93 to actually fly a helicopter over land, but that's just off the top of my head, which maybe is why that's not covered. But I think that the rest of those examples, Lisa, that you were talking about would be covered, unless Nathan or Jean-Paul wanted to jump in. No? All right. Okay, I think we just need to consider that one. And then Ian, consider. Yeah, no, I take your point about the helicopter, but I don't think you need, I mean, I know that does sound frightening. I think what we need to do is understand whether this happens, first of all. So we will ask the transmission companies whether this is happening. And then we probably need, as a commission, to find out whether or not Section 93 is what enlivens that ability to use that. I suspect it's probably not, but anyway.
But
that's
how,
something for us.
Sarah, I can tell you it happens. We've had the line inspection helicopters 15 to 20 metres above our property here.
15, 20, okay, all right.
Yeah.
And they've been using...
Oh, yeah, sorry, of course, line inspection, yeah.
They've been using drones without permission, going across lands looking for on the Western Renewable Link without permission.
Oh, really? Using drones?
Yep.
Okay, that's interesting.
Right, so
okay.
they're doing it without permission.
And then half the people who you speak to will say, no, nothing's happened, because they haven't asked the questions or they haven't given strict instructions to the contractors or subcontractors about what they can and can't do and how they act. So it's, you know, people have reported things to ombudsmen, to whatever else, and it just gets, in one case, it was just said, oh, no, there's a process about new transmission lines. Well, they're on an existing transmission line, and that's what EWOV said to them. So it's been an ongoing issue, but it just hasn't, whenever it's raised, nothing ever eventuates from it.
Okay. No, I hear you. That's, Alan, did you want to?
Unfortunately for the helicopters and planes, that's actually part of the aviation situation, and they don't require the Section 93 at all. Anybody can lodge a flight plan and fly anywhere they like, providing the flight plan's approved by the aviation authority. So if you're going to extend off into the aviation, you're now going to have to deal with the Commonwealth and their aspects of CASA. That if that's going to be an issue for you. Unfortunately, the flight plans, and that can be, they have to be logged, obviously, but they also have to decree or declare the minimum height they're going to fly at. If that requires them to come down to 20, 30 metres above the power situations, then that's an issue through CASA, not through any of the situations that we have with Section 93.
But then it's a potential double standard, because if you look at the things you're not allowed to do, if you get a transmission line, you're not allowed a plane anywhere near it. You're not allowed to operate a drone. You're not even allowed to stubble burn. So there's seemingly two sets of rules, whether you're the landholder or the transmission company.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. The average Joe Blow on the street can't fly a drone anywhere near power lines, although an authorised and licensed pilot, drone pilot through CASA can, and they can fly it right up to the insulators. They can do anything they like, provided they meet CASA's regulations. So it is a bit of a problem. If you see that as a problem, you're going to have to take it up with the federal government and CASA. Hello?
Okay. Well, thanks, Alan. You know more than me. All right. So just going to the next slide. Okay. So really, this has been really helpful discussion, and I think it's given us a couple of avenues that we want to take forward. So, as I said, we're going to be going out to the regions and talking, well, Western Vic mainly, to talk to communities about the code, and also we've got a little survey which is fairly quick. So if you want to give us written feedback, you obviously, of course, you can do a submission, but I understand you are all very busy people and you've been engaged on this process for over a long period of time. I assure you, we will take into account your previous submission. So it's not as though we're starting from a blank slate. We've all been on this journey. So if you want to give us a new submission, that would be fantastic. But we have listened and we're not asking people to repeat all their experience. And if you just want to do this very quick survey about, what's important to you in this code and what you think's okay and what you think would change, that's also a way to do it. So we'll be consulting, we've said until the 27th of July. Let us know if you need more time than that. And Ian, would you come to our GRES advisory groups meeting to discuss this code? Sure, we're happy to talk about this anywhere. So, yep, can you just someone in my team will have your email address, Ian, I think, because you've logged into this session. So we'll follow up with you to get details of that. We'd be very keen to come and have a chat with you about that. And I think I saw Nathan's hand up.
Nathan just going back to EWOV.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a broadening of their scope of basically what they can investigate? Because at the moment it's very narrow because they've only been lumped with the transmission lines recently, and what they can actually go and investigate is very, very limited. So if in this statement of expectation or whatever else we're going to call it, we're going to refer it to EWOV, what's changed at EWOV to actually broaden their scopes and what they can actually investigate?
So they already have jurisdiction over this because all the transmission companies have to be a member of EWOV. So,
but what they can investigate is very, very limited.
Their terms.
It's very, 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 very limited. In my discussions with them, in my discussions with them, it is very limited in what they can actually help you with.
So are you saying that even things within, so obviously they can't help you with things like compensation.
Understand
that'd be out of scope. But if you've asked for certain biosecurity measures to be implemented by a transmission company and they haven't been, like that sort of thing should be in scope, or do you want to tell me what's...
There's a lot that is not in scope, and that comes right back to consultation itself, and we're talking about two-way consultation, not one-way consultation, which is what has been happening in the past. Two-way consultation, and if you're not getting that, big business basically overrides landowners. So you present that to EWOV and nothing comes of it because big business trumps. So and it's sorry to be blatantly like Jack Blunt about it all. The scope of what they can work with at the present stage is very minimal. So yes, if they've breached the biosecurity thing, rightio. But then you got to go around and spend half your life trying to prove that. So which is black and white. Or you get sent to a different department that will look after it. So at the moment, their scope of what they can investigate in this sort of a situation is very, very limited.
Well, okay, that's interesting. I mean, the scope of their jurisdiction would be as broad as this code. So everything under the code, they will have jurisdiction over to, and they're trying to resolve.
So that comes back to consultation as well?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So if it's a tick the box exercise or if it's genuine consultation?
Well, that's the judgment that the dispute that EWOV would make. Has it been genuine consultation?
They haven't been able to make a judgment on that because they don't have the scope to do that.
Okay. And I think that's what we're hearing is that's the question that we're trying to get more views on. And I'm hearing that from Nathan is maybe you're saying EWOV isn't the right body for this. And that's what we're trying to get views on, who is the appropriate external dispute resolution body, and do you think EWOV's the right body or not? So that's what we're trying to ascertain. So do you think another body would be better?
Well, it depends on who's funding the body. That's the bottom line. So you go to the Wind and Energy Commissioner, and it's federally funded with limited staffing pool. So, which generally meaning if you're federally funded or funded by a political organisation, there's non-impartiality in it. So EWOV is supposedly impartial, yes, agreed, but their scope to what they can actually do is very limited.
Okay, all right.
Experiences in the past have been usually they say it's not relevant to them, and it falls through the cracks. No one knows who they can go to, so they give up.
Okay, look, I think that's important feedback. Connor, did you put your hand up? Did you want to?
Yeah, that was me. Thanks, Sarah. Just by way of introduction, I'm the Industry Insights and Engagement Manager at EWOV. Just in relation to that point that was being made in terms of potential jurisdictional limits, I think a significant point goes to something that you raised previously in terms of whether or not the code should be applying to the voluntary access agreements. I think that's a really relevant point as a potential limitation in the sense that jurisdiction is only being enlivened in the circumstances in which access is occurring under Section 93 of the Industry Act, as opposed to those circumstances arriving under the voluntary access agreements.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So Nathan, I failed to pick up is that probably some of those complaints might have been in relation to the voluntary agreements, and EWOV's position is that the code should be expanded to cover the voluntary agreements. Yep. And so I guess what we're trying to get everyone's views on here is, do you all agree with that? Should the code cover these voluntary agreements, or on the other hand, is it legitimate that a transmission company can rely on two adult parties entering into a contract that takes it outside of the code? So those are the two different perspectives.
The contract needs to be fair, but I just quickly need to say, Section 93, there is a lot of transmission lines that Section 93 didn't exist for, and I think they're the ones that have been in no man's land. So if it's if it was SEC, then no one's quite sure what's going on and they haven't been dealt with.
Yeah.
So where's the start and stop point there? So you cannot make a submission to EWOV until Section 93 has been enacted.
Yeah.
Or the behaviour prior to that, which doesn't come under EWOV's responsibility. The proponent can do whatever they like up until Section 93 is enacted. So, where's your start and stop point?
Yeah. Okay. I think even if there's like any potential to use Section 93, like those pre-notices, Nathan L., then it is covered by EWOV, although Connor, you're welcome to, you can have a right of reply if you like. But I do think already what's proposed, it would cover all of those aspects in that time frame. But I agree with you that if it was a voluntary agreement, then no, it wouldn't be covered in what we're proposing. Connor, is that right to you?
consistent with my understanding. Thanks, Sarah.
And I don't know whether Nathan or Lisa, either one, want to jump in.
I think Nathan's first.
Nathan, sorry.
No, I've got my hand down now.
Oh, that was the old hand. Lisa.
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't think I got that answer from, I suppose, what do we do for the, any transmission built between, say, 1960 and 2001? Yep. So we just need to clarify that is seen as being, if it was done with a compulsory power, it's seen as being a Section 93 and therefore would be under EWOBs.
Yeah. So I've definitely got your submission. So the way, just to be really clear, so the way the code is drafted at the moment, they would not be included, but that's exactly why we're consulting. So I'm hearing your very strong view that they should be included, and that's really helpful, and that's what we'll take all those views to the Commission. And we have gone to the transmission companies and asked them for more information about those lines and access to those lines to help us form a view on that one. Looks like it's getting, it's closer to 7 o'clock. It's getting late. All right, so I might go to the next slide. So this is just kind of the timeframes. As you can see, we're partly through this consultation process. The final decision on the code we're expecting in September, and then it would commence in October. That's the proposed time frame there. And I think we're almost at the end. Next slide, thanks. Questions? Had some good discussions through. Looks like people are quiet. Maybe pop to the next slide. All right, so that's probably all I was going to say. That's been a really helpful discussion for us, and we've got a couple of action items. I've agreed to talk to WorkSafe, which I will do, and we're going to talk to Ian about going to GRES session, and I think someone's got their hand up. Keith. Hi, Keith.
Yes, thanks for the information. Good knowledge learnt. But just thinking, there seems to be no prerequisite that a Section 93 can be used without any sort of regulated investment test or business case to go ahead, because currently with VNI West, there's no authorised business case at this stage. It may never have, because under ministerial orders, the business case is not going to be valid at any time soon. Well, that's progressing, but then they're still going to be requiring access. I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, sure. You just broke up a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. So the test for the use of Section 93 is not it's not the RIT-T test. It is whether or not the company that's using it has been licensed by us. So with VNI West, AEMO has established a subsidiary called TCV, and they have not yet been licensed by us, but we are talking to them about a license. So they will not be able to use those Section 93 powers on VNI West until they are licensed by us.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get to, because many people believe that it's not the correct route in the first place, but yet there's going to be no formal sign-off anyone other than the ministerial says this is the way it's going to go. And we're talking about people having a social license to do such things. Well, there'll never be one. These Section 93 will become even more contentious.
Yeah, I hear you, Keith. It's I know there's a lot of people who are really upset about the transmission lines and VNI West and the use of the NEVA and orders. It is, you know, there are all the planning and environment processes, but you know, I hear you on the social license point. It's
planning and the EES isn't looking at these things either.
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to talk more, Barbara? Hi, Barbara. Oh no, or was that Lisa? Sorry, I can't see. I've got.
Yeah, it was. I know Minister likes to say these issues and agricultural impacts and compensation will be looked at as part of the EES, but the terms of reference don't. It's about the only thing that doesn't go on a site by site, business by business. It looks at the zones, not even the type of activity. They might be speaking to one or two farmers and making generalizations, but generally these things, we haven't seen the documents yet. We have seen the terms of reference will say it's less than 1% of Victoria's agricultural land, therefore we don't need to worry. But that is a concern when it's a compulsory power that is actually going to have limitations on how you can farm. So again, it's that no one is actually seeming to, everyone's going, oh, someone else is doing it, but no one is actually looking at these issues. And there's no, you know, umpire you can go to. And if there is, it's the court. And that's why people are concerned with NEVA orders, because your only opportunity to test anything has been switched off.
Yeah, I hear you. I just was checking. Barbara, did you want to say something? Sorry, I was just waiting.
Yes.
Hi, Barbara. Yeah, hi, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. I've just been looking at, so this, I guess, is relating to our property, but there would be others where the easement would diagonally cross through our property, yet the proposed access tracks won't be within the easement. So they'd be intending to access our property from sort of two road sides, but they wouldn't be accessing via the easement. And they're also proposing to access two neighbouring properties. It's really sort of three through our property. So how does, when they have an easement and then they have a right to enter the easement, then how does it apply if their access tracks are outside the easement?
So why have they put the access tracks outside the easement?
Convenience.
It happens more than you think.
There's access tracks everywhere outside easements.
Okay. So, I mean, there's no requirement under the Electricity Industry Act that, you know, access go through the easement. But I suppose I was just wondering why you wouldn't do it if you originally.
Well, technically, they're only meant to access from the easement.
Well, I think Section 93 actually gives broader powers, but what I would just be asking, and I don't have an answer, but what is the reason that they wouldn't just use the easement? I mean, is it anyway? I think, Barbara, that sounds. Have you asked the transmission company?
Would I perhaps have a chat with someone?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
And I'll just send you a map to show you, like one property next to us they're going through. Well, the easement in that property doesn't have any roadside access, but I'm sort of wondering how you're covered, and if they need to access via then what is your private property to get to the easement, then do they need to issue you a Section 93 notice that they're coming in, and how would you be covered insurance-wise, that sort of thing?
Okay, I will get Nathan Zed, who is a lot smarter than me, to call you tomorrow and have a chat to you about that, Barbara.
Okay, so I had I emailed my phone number, or I think I have done a submission before.
I'm pretty sure we've got yours, Barbara. That's fine. Okay, is there anyone? Yep.
Sorry.
So keep going.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other properties, as Nathan said, in the same situation where, you know, you'll have them accessing via your land to get to somebody else's land, and then just wondering how we'll be covered for that.
Okay. Yep. All right.
All right.
Nathan Z's going to get onto that. Thanks, Barbara.
And that's a biosecurity risk too, because they'd have to be washing down between properties.
Yeah. No, I hear you. All right. Barbara, have you still got, did you want to say something else, Barbara, or was that an old hand?
Sorry. No, I can.
That's okay. All right. Well, I might just summarize a couple of things that I've heard. So certainly hearing about the SECV existing transmission lines and lots of concerns about how access is being undertaken in relation to those lines, and concerns that landowners might not even know who owns those lands anymore. So that's been really important. We need to look at that. The language around post-access obligations and really making sure that we reflect the fact that this is a long-term partnership between landowners and transmission companies. The timing of access in a way that doesn't cause harm to land and the way it's being used. Thinking about harvest season, etc. We had a really good discussion about the length of the notice, the 6 months issue. That I think that's something we need to think more about. The issues around the different sort of biosecurity risks and agriculture Victoria, and whether we need to be broader than that. The time frame to receive final biosecurity report, that 15 days, noting the obligation to report immediately, but whether or not you would even know if something had happened immediately, I think that was really important. And then we had a good discussion about EWOV's jurisdiction as well. And thanks, Connor, for coming along from EWOV, and we will follow up and have more discussions about EWOV and the scope of its role, and also EWOV's submission that the code should cover the voluntary agreements. That was an important point to make. And then, Lisa, did you just want to talk to your last point?
In summary, you said, who owns it? Well, actually, it's always the landholder. In this case, it's an easement. So it's not that the company owns that section of land. They've got a limited right of access as per whatever was in the plan of subdivision that put the easement on the agreement that's with it.
Yeah, sorry, that was my mistake in my summary. Thanks, Lisa. And William has popped our contact details into the chat. Thank you very much, William. And any last comments from anyone? Just having a look. No? All right. Well, well, then that's it from us. Thanks again for everyone's participation. We really appreciate it. And just a reminder that consulting until the 27th of July. So please get in touch with us. We are keen to hear all your views. So thanks, everyone. Stay well and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.